Greetings, I am Tom Earl. On this week's episode, we talk interfaith, creative writing, and magic with Alex Sullivan. Check it out. Greetings, everyone. I am Tom Earl. Welcome to the celebration. As you know, this is my year of courage. We know you could be anywhere, so the fact that you are here today sharing your greatest gifts, your energy, and your time means the world to us. We hope you know that you are loved just as you are. Today, I have an amazing guest. She is the legendary, the infamous Alex Sullivan! Brr, 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 brr. What's up, Alex?
Hi.
How are you?
Doing pretty well.
Nice. And that's a wrap. I think that was a good interview. Are you
Perfect. Yeah, I feel great about it. Thanks.
Mind if I read this fantastic bio to the folks out there in podcast land?
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Alex Sullivan is. Oh, hang on. Let me turn off the echo. Here we go. Alex Sullivan is a master's student at NYU's Center for Experimental Humanities, where she studies the ways religion and culture interact with one another, with a focus on postcolonial and diaspora studies. She has a BA in both religious studies and social studies from Stetson University. She is a senior editor of poetry for the GSAS literary journal Caustic Frolic. Alex believes there's beauty in everything, and she is always looking for it. Yes, indeed. That's ballin'.
Thanks.
What does NYU stand for?
New York University.
Aha! I've always wondered.
Oh my God. Out of all of the acronyms.
What was it like going through this journey? You know, I know myself, it took me 5.5 years to go through my undergrad, just trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to invest time in studying. And you were already in your master's. So what was that journey like, figuring out academically, passionately in my life, this is what I gravitate towards?
It took a lot of being really honest with myself, because I have been in now 2 interdisciplinary programs. So I've essentially made both of my degrees. And so you have to really trust yourself at sort of 18 to be like, yep, this is a totally adult decision and it makes lots of sense. There are some days when I don't feel like that, but for the most part, I think I'm doing really good work in communities that actually need it. So I think that's what keeps me going in the program that I'm in.
What does it feel like, or how do you know when you're trusting yourself?
Oh, that's such a good question. It depends. I don't always know when I'm trusting myself, because with my depression, it really feels like it's hard to trust myself sometimes, because sometimes I'm just removed from who I am. So when I find something that I love, that brings me a lot of joy, I may not share it with everyone around me, but I definitely try and keep it close.
We appreciate you sharing that. So interdisciplinary, that's what your undergraduate and graduate is in, right? How does that work?
So one of my undergraduate degrees was an interdisciplinary studies degree. It said social science, right? That meant that I could choose 3 social sciences to train in, and I would get my degree. So I chose history, sociology, and anthropology. For my master's degree, interdisciplinary studies means that through the patronage of my school, I, as a student, can take classes in any department of the university as a whole.
Damn.
Yeah. So
how'd you pull that off?
They trusted me, which is great, because I wrote my statement of purpose about comic books. So the fact that they continue to trust me to do this work It's pretty good.
And at one of the best universities that are around, right? Isn't NYU a pretty big deal?
I guess so. Yeah.
Hashtag humble.
Yeah, I guess so.
So what are some ahas you've had along your academic journey that you can share with us?
The biggest and most recent is incorporating a lot of my creative work into my academic work. So just recently I took a course that was based on restructuring research and what we view as legitimate sources. And our final projects were a challenge to create something that we wouldn't normally be in the realm of creating. And so I turned in essentially a chapbook of my poetry surrounding my emotional illnesses, which went over pretty well. I was surprised. So,
what do you mean?
Yeah.
Can you clarify?
Yeah, of course. So the way it was structured was as a playlist, and it was essentially different tracks that get you through anxiety, a panic attack, right? The different stages of a panic attack. Because the language for a panic attack that people use, or I guess anxiety attack, both work. They say that it's a loop, right? So your brain continues in those loops, and while it's continuing in that loop, it sort of drives itself into a state of worked up. And so I wrote out, sometimes carefully, sometimes pretty recklessly, what those stages felt like to me concerning my identity as a student, as a minority living in New York, a couple of other things as well.
That's awesome. That sounds very personal too for something academic, which is usually, footnotes and like kind of like a very like a sterilized conclusion, and yours to be so personable and vulnerable. What was that like, taking that route?
Oh, it was terrifying.
I believe it.
Terrifying, especially because, as you know, I don't share my writing with people ever. So it's just, I think it was, after it was done, it was very freeing. While I was doing it, I was more anxious than when I was having the actual anxiety attack. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your writing journey. When did you start to realize writing is my jam? I enjoy it, or I have a love-hate relationship, but I'm driven to keep doing it. How did that begin? Walk me through a little bit of that.
I began writing to deal with a very young thing, which is heartbreak, which I think a lot of people do. Before that, I really just focused on music and let the notes sort of speak for me. But when I didn't have easy access to my cello anymore, and I didn't have easy access to the confidence I needed to be able to sing, I needed another outlet. And I kind of fell in with poetry. I have a very love-hate relationship with poetry. Very love-hate relationship with poetry. I think it was so intimidating. It's so intimidating, when you're in high school and you're surrounded by all these honors kids that are published by 16. And I was just sort of dipping my toes into it. I had to contend with a lot of other things, familial pressure, that sort of thing. And I just never felt like my poetry was good enough. So I would produce it and then hide it away. Or I would do free writes and hide them away. I do a lot of creative nonfiction work usually. And finally, I think I stumbled upon my old Tumblr in undergrad. And I was like, some of this is really trash. And I'm glad I don't write it anymore. But some of it's good. And all of it's honest, which I really loved. So I think it just gives me a space to be honest and really strive towards introspection which is very necessary.
Mm. And so, that kind of leads into a question that I think is very relevant to what we're talking about. But first, to give a little intro, is it true or false that you have a sibling that may or may not have been born around the same time you were?
It is true. The only part of that is false is that I was born first. Just in case anybody asked or wanted to know.
How much first?
1 minute.
Well, damn, that's an important minute.
Thank you, right? Ash always wants to fight me on it, but no, it's important. So everybody should know about it.
And some folks listening may know Ash was one of our previous guests, and you had submitted a question to ask Ash, I believe, about your aunt. And Ash wanted to submit a question, which is very relevant to what we're talking about. And their question is, do you feel it's easier to share your writing now that you've been writing so openly?
Ooh, I'm mad at her for that question. Okay. All right. No, actually. Still no. It's very hard for me to share what I write. I've even gotten into writing more fiction, great planned out epics that I never thought I would have the attention span or even the sort of wherewithal to do, the skills. And I still don't like sharing it. Like it's like performance anxiety. I don't know. Yeah.
No, I resonate with you on that one, especially around songs for me, where I'll try to perfect them and obsess over them. Like, this is terrible. And then somebody will listen to it and be like, this is amazing. And I'm like, I'm just not a good gauge of what's good for certain aspects of my art I'm insecure of. You know what I'm saying? Like where you were saying, oh, this is trash. I bet you if we read it, we'd be like, oh my gosh, this is glorious.
Okay. I don't know if that's true.
So you also do interfaith work. I know you're really big in that space. Tell me a little bit about what shapes your interfaith work.
So my father is a very aggressive atheist. And he'll probably watch this interview, so that'll be fun. But he is. He's a very aggressive atheist. But my mom and my godmother are so spiritual. So growing up in my household, I had a very early grasp on what tension between faith looked like. And I think it just gives me a very honest place to work from, because even though I'm not always the best mediator, because I got an attitude and I talk a lot, I think I come from a good place, and I'm always trying to educate people. And that just is the most important goal of my interfaith work.
So do you like to do interfaith work from the lens of facilitation, groups, or more like writing, lecturing, more the academic world?
Both. I've had it both ways. I think being able to present to a room full of academics on a topic that they may not really know anything about, especially because I work with a lot of religions that are culturally and ethnic based, which have a tenuous relationship with mainstream academia in the United States. That's always very fulfilling. But being able to facilitate and make sure that the right voices are in the right room and create dialogue in those spaces, or even just witness organic dialogue, that's also very fulfilling.
What are some of the things you've presented on?
I have done a lot of work with Native American communities in the United States. So I think the traditional phrase for them is American Indian. I hate that phrase, so I say Native American. I do a lot of work with their cultural traditions and making sure that students feel represented in the space but also just people feel represented in a space. So what it looks like to bring, cultural and spiritual experts to where I'm at, so other people can hear what they have to say. I also do a lot of work with, folk Christianity. Sounds weird to say. It just means Christianity practiced through a very ethnic lens, right? So Catholicism is not practiced the same way in any two spaces of the world. And a large part of that difference is sort of the ethnic traditions that go into the rituals behind it. And so my personal passion is looking at those different lenses and seeing how they're the same and different.
Could you give us some examples?
Yeah. For my class that I just recently took on Latin American education, I wrote a poem.
Hey!
On different religious and cultural figures, feminist figures, in the Chicana movement. So I was inspired by a classmate, and I ended up writing this poem and then presenting it to the class.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it something we can hear?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
You weren't expecting to hear poetry, but once you mentioned it like that, like you just kind of set up the ask.
I wasn't expecting to read poetry, but that's fine. Oh, goodness.
Can you share with what's the name of the poem?
It's called La Madrina, which means godmother in Spanish. Yeah.
Nice.
All right, let's go. In a rhombus lives a godmother who moves between space and not space, wearing many faces, but always making use of her own hands and hips, the divine and the dirty, willing to stretch herself and house any tragedy. Look for her in the lines. Patterns are what humans thrive on. The first drawn in old graphite, clouding the page with gray dust. La Maliche, a conqueress of her own body, seductive and tempting in her ownership and agency, taking up space, setting down roots, and shoving for all she's worth. The next is a wobbling line in watery ink, barely completed. La Irona, devastation and depression and hatred of self, but still so strong, fluid like the water that fills her lungs. The humidity that wraps itself around every breath, still moving, slogging forward with every wail. The third, the straightest yet faintest, La Virgen de Guadalupe. Purity and silence, and a dagger wrapped in the softest silk. Candles in solemn veneration, quiet, desperate love. Strength in staking a space and learning the art of compromise. This is a different kind of trinity, completed by the last line, drawn in invisible ink, a solid type of justice, cleaved by way of scepter, clenched tight by bony hands, solidarity in the absence of presence, an inescapable act of equality. And between all of these women lives the maiden, mother, and crone, like a favorite aunt constantly aging in and out of phases and faces, but always there.
Yes. Woo. So the thing that connects a lot of that poem is the way Catholicism is practiced. Is that what I'm understanding?
The way Catholicism is practiced, but more importantly, the feminist icon that a lot of the women in that movement find in the Virgin Mary. Yeah. And then other folk entities that exist, some controversial and some historical.
That's dope. It's one of those poems where you got to print out and then do all the research to like really grasp. It's a roadmap to knowledge.
Oh, gosh.
I appreciate that. When you bring people together then to do dialogue, around interfaith? What are some of the ingredients that are necessary that you make sure are present?
It really, I hate to say this again, but we say this a lot in religious studies. It depends. I think with the group, I always want to make sure that whatever space it is, it's best serving their needs. So I am very attentive when it comes to asking what those needs are. And I try to make sure that the space is one not of equality, but rather equity. I want people to feel like they can always share and be respected. I think using the word safe space is, not best practices. Maybe something like including a safe space, but also a brave space, pushing people to get past what they hold or maybe any assumptions that they bring to the table with them, and be very honest and vulnerable with one another.
It's so interesting how just in the past couple of years, we've switched, like as the language develops to describe more accurately the kind of work we're doing, from equality to equity and from safe space to brave space. What's the difference between both those for you? So in the field of interfaith dialogue, what's the difference between equality and equity?
Equality means that there are an even amount of people from different faiths and ethnicities in the space. Equity means that all of those people feel like they can speak in the space and that their opinion will be heard. And I don't know if that's always practiced. I don't always think it is.
What about safe space and brave space?
I think safe space has turned into this phrasing that people call upon when they don't want to talk about something that makes them uncomfortable. So when they don't want to be pushed past maybe some stereotypes that they hold, or when they don't want to be called out for necessarily holding an inaccurate opinion. The protection of an individual in a space is so important, but more important than that is the knowledge that they share and that other people share. So a brave space pushes you past those things that you bring to the table.
I love that. Do you have any examples you can share without breaking confidentiality of times where you've seen that kind of a breakthrough or transformation within a group?
I mean, yes. At an event that I attended over the summer, it was a 4-day sort of workshop. And there were some people in the room who didn't necessarily have the vocabulary to talk about the socio-political issues that they wanted to in the context of faith. And through some very strategic conversations, I think the group was able to help them get to a better place.
Would you be able to be specific on like what were the social political, or does that start to go into too much breaking confidentiality?
I think it goes a little too much into breaking the confidentiality. Otherwise, I would tell you more.
We appreciate you honoring the group, and this was not a test, but an example for you to shine. So
when my bosses watch this, they'll be very pleased.
They're like, well done. So instead, let me ask it like this. A lot of times when you go into interfaith work, there's sometimes the habit to focus on just faith, leave out the ways our identities intersect. So how do you bring that into the group, or what are some, advice you have for people that when you are having an interfaith conversation, to make sure you're also including the way race, gender, sexual orientation, all these things really influence the conversation and our experience within the world of faith? Easy question for you.
So easy, yeah. We should finish the interview. We're good. No, that's actually pretty heavy. There's so much that needs to be done in the field of interfaith work in terms of the way that we include intersectionality. So sometimes I've found that in spaces that really, in interfaith spaces, we don't always focus on intersectionality successfully. And I love that it's an area that we need to work on, because it means that there's something that we need to improve, which means that this is alive and it's something that's going to continue to be relevant to society in the future, which is awesome. But it can be awkward sometimes, especially if you enter the room as a minority and are just very consciously aware that you are that minority, that you may be some of the only minority representation in the space. So I think a large way to do that is faith work right now is still focused on sort of the humanizing aspect of doing it, right, of interfaith. So you meet somebody who is of a different faith, and because they have humanized it to you, it now is not something that scares you anymore, which is problematic in its own right because we get things like ambassador fatigue. But if you are a minority, or if you practice an alternative religion, so you have an alternative religious identity, make sure you're in those conversations. That's the best advice that I can give, because otherwise people are not going to take you into account.
That was deep. I've never heard that phrase, labeling that so well. What's ambassador fatigue for those who heard that and are like, ooh, what's that?
Ambassador fatigue is when you're the token in a space and people ask you lots of questions that they would ask a token. And you get tired of answering them. And you get tired of explaining things from your point of view and speaking for your whole entire community, because it's unfair to demand that of you. Yeah.
So often what I see in interfaith work or anything around cross-cultural is that what has the biggest impact in the beginning is people building genuine relationships.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be the case in your work as well?
Yes. I think there's no way around it, especially because faith is so personal. It just has to be done through personal human connection. And it takes a lot of time and sometimes can be very messy, but it's really important to the work. So you can't really avoid it. Yeah.
So, one thing that I'm always reaching for is then once we form those genuine connections, how do we get like white guy Tom, who just had his like bias made aware because he formed a relationship with somebody who's like a different race or religion. I'm like, I really like this person. How do we get them to go from that to like realizing the institutional implications of it and my role in the system? You know what I'm saying? How to take that relationship and bridge it into a more systemic conversation.
Yeah. That's hard, I think, because a lot of people don't think on that level anyway, like just in general from day to day. So to bring them to that level, you really do have to start from ground zero. And it's kind of like the elevator in, what movie is that? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the one that just goes up and up and up and up. And it's kind of like people are expecting to stop, and then it never stops. And it's always connected to something else, and the web keeps getting bigger, and they just don't understand why. And so that can be very overwhelming. My advice is to take it slow. Don't be afraid of introducing big words very fast, because the sooner they get a grasp on those words, the sooner they'll be able to recognize the meaning behind them in day-to-day life.
That is such a good analogy. Have you heard that somewhere, or did you just come up with that right now?
I just came over there right now because I just watched Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I would love for you to write an academic paper and like coin some sort of phrase around the hitchhiker's elevator to ending institutional discrimination.
Yes.
Because
I will try to make that happen.
Good. Because if I
write it,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if I write it, I'll dedicate it to you. Don't
Whoa! You heard it here, folks, first. You heard it here first, folks. So what's the vision for you for what's coming next? I know you're graduating in December, so let me be the first annoying person to ask you, what are you doing next now that you've accomplished this big milestone? I want to be that first annoying person.
Thanks.
But it doesn't have to, you don't have to give us concrete, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to work for you. But what's your vision? What gets you excited about the future and all these skills and tools that you've acquired?
I am actually at a crossroads right now. So I am working in a job that allows me to do a lot of groundwork, personal work, and really find the personal connections and interfaith, right? So it's a student affairs job. And since I was a little kid, I wanted to be a professor. So I'm trying to decide whether or not I'm going to work student affairs or go for my PhD.
Ooh.
Yeah. So that's been a time.
What would your PhD be in? Interdisciplinary again?
No, it would be in the study of digital religion and how minorities use digital spaces to create like sacred spaces. So we think of sacred space, we think of churches, sort of stone and mortar, and increasingly I'm finding that when it comes to minority religions, so looking at like alternative faiths like Yoruba or Santeria, like traditions like that, people are forming their own communal churches online. And yeah, this has a lot of really interesting implications for where faith is going in the United States, how globalization is affecting the way that we see our faith communities, who we're now including in those communities. So yeah.
I can't believe we almost went this whole interview without you dropping this gem. Wow.
Yeah.
It just makes me think too how like virtual reality and all that would take those spaces even to the next level.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Like, it's just so cool to be online and see my friends doing tarot readings for each other, and that the sacredness of the ritual is preserved, which is just so fascinating.
Go into just a little bit on that, if you just feel free to word vomit or just share off the top of your mind, because it's so interesting and I can see your passion.
Yeah, I think I'm really passionate about it because there's not a lot in academia right now that's really focused on now. We focused a lot on the past, and we focused a lot on, especially in religious studies, we focus a lot on specific communities, if you know what I mean, majority mainstream communities in America. Full stop. So to find these pockets of other communities that are really creating these spaces online, sort of outside of mainstream influence, so really with their own power, it gets to so many different levels, right? It gets to the question of why they needed to be there in the first place, why they don't feel comfortable having a physical space, why the way that power works in the United States, how powerful they are, and where that power is coming. And when I say power, I really mean it in sort of like access to the resources that we have available. So like social and physical, like economical, but more social, like in cultural phrasing. How normalized is it going to be in the future when you have all of these online spaces. Just so fascinating.
Wow. And I think of too, you know, how if I was to do something more private, like I'd have to find it, walk into the space, everybody looks at me, you know, like I realize that I'm an outsider stepping in. Whereas once it becomes online, the mass consumption, pop culturalization, maybe even the cultural appropriation aspect starts to come in. So how do you keep it like?
Exactly. But then also there's globalization, right? So then you have faith communities of people of different Afro-Caribbean traditions or different like indigenous traditions, and they're all bringing their rituals to the table. And they say, this is for everybody. If it gets you to where you need to be in the faith, if this prayer works for you, use it. And so now we have this grand commons of just religious comfort objects that people can take, like reserved from the library, because it's available online and people are just saying, yes, it's perfectly fine for you to use. This one is not okay for you to use, and this is why, right? But then also, as any sort of curation of like a living thing, there are so many people who don't agree. So you have a lot of the older like faith communities in that space really like, no, this is the way the ritual is done. We don't care that it's other ways. This is the way the ritual is done. And then I have friends who they've like their altars or their like spaces are, part of them are like cardboard cutouts of their favorite celebrities. They do all of their spell work with Cheeto dust on their hands. Like they don't care. And, and it doesn't like get rid of the sacredness of it anyway. And so you have these two different prayer spaces that are essentially, they look the same on paper. It's the same prayer or it's the same spell or whatever, but practiced totally differently. And in the online commons, both are accepted. Just so interesting. It's so interesting.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you introducing this to us. And, you know, either way, whatever your journey comes next, I hope this is something you dive into because you clearly have a passion for it. Very interesting.
Thanks.
So you might have heard me say at the beginning that this is my year of courage. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to expand the definition and associations of courage from what they're stereotypically perceived as. And part of that is just asking each of my guests what courage is to them. And so for you, what is courage in your life?
I have a really difficult time with decision making. I agonize over my decisions. And for me, courage is being able to make a decision either on my character or in my career or in my personal life and sticking with it. And at the first sign of it not working, instead of going, well, we're done, really taking a second to say, okay, how do we work with this? How do we stick with it? So, yeah.
And do you have any courage role models?
I have a couple. My godmother, for sure, was one of the most courageous people I knew, had the pleasure of knowing. Yeah, she was just, even though she had so much against her physically and then later on in her life, sort of mentally and emotionally, she woke up every day. And she woke up every day. And that's, for some people, that's a brave act in and of itself. That's just massive. And so for her to do that and not only wake up every day, but be excited about life and have passion for it and be involved in other people's lives, just overcame so much just to get out of bed. So, yeah.
Well, we appreciate you sharing that, inviting us into your family in that way, and the way during this interview you've invited us into your life and what you're passionate about. and that you really demonstrated the courage to be open with us. So just want to affirm you and thank you so much, Alex, for being such a badass guest.
You're welcome.
Where can folks reach out to you to tell you how awesome you are?
You can reach out to me through my email, which I usually use very often, my Facebook, and if you want really bad pictures of my really awesome afro, Instagram.
Okay, cool. So what we'll do, since those are probably all going to be different links, is all of those will be linked up in the show notes, and you can give me each one of those offline, and we'll have all those linked up for people.
Yeah.
That sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. So I know you also have a literary journal that you're an editor of, which is super awesome. Do you want to plug that or talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I work for a literary journal on campus that's run through our graduate school. It's called Caustic Frolic, which is very academic. And it's available to read online. And we actually have some really cool digital submissions as well. So I highly recommend everybody take a look. And we do open submissions twice a year. So be on the lookout.
Yes, indeed. And I believe this is your birthday week. Is this correct?
Yes.
I believe your birthday, depending on when folks are listening to this is coming out on a Monday. Your birthday is this Friday, October 5th, right?
Yeah.
How you feel about that?
I'm excited because it's actually my first birthday in a couple of years where me and Ashley will be able to celebrate, just plan something together and celebrate.
Oh,
so.
That's awesome. Well, shall we sing a really long version of Happy Birthday for you, just myself right now?
Oh my, yes.
I wasn't expecting, yes. Happy birthday to you. And justice for all. Amen.
Oh, love it.
That was awesome. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Well, I love how the universe aligns. This comes out on your birthday. Around your birthday.
Yeah.
I used to release all my episodes on Friday, and I just switched them to Monday. Otherwise, this would have came out on your actual birthday.
Nice.
Well, I always like the guests to have the last word. And so, what is your invitation to those listening to do, to think about, to be? What is your invitation?
I think I'll invite people to be kind to themselves. It's so easy to be down on yourself, to not trust yourself all the time. And it's very hard to be kind when you've made a mistake or even when you've had a great triumph, and just celebrating that. So I would like to invite everybody to exercise being kind, not to others, but to yourself.
Yes, powerful. I love that. Thank you so much, Alex. And folks who want to wish Alex an happy birthday or tell her how much you appreciate her, all those links are in the show notes, which can be found at tomworld.com/Alex, tomworld.com/ALEX, tomworld.com/Alex. Alex, thank you so very much. I appreciate you and happy birthday to you.
Thanks.
And to all those listening, we're wishing you peace and blessings. One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching.